Hey guys, Brian here. Hope your week's going great. The pace of growth in the U.S. national debt, 1 trillion every 100 days. It's difficult to get a feel for numbers that large, but we're going to try. In this video, I've got several charts, a couple near-term, a couple long-term, that I think will drive home the gravity of the situation. Stay with me. All right, guys, welcome back. Real quick, I'll put up some shots around Niseko in Japan. I've been wanting to ski Japan for years, and I finally got a chance this past January. I can certainly confirm the truly ridiculous amounts of snow that get dumped in this area. I've never seen a snowstorm quite like my first day in Niseko. I've also been researching some of the financial history of the area. I'm always interested in Japan's experience with deflation because I think Western economies are destined for some version of what Japan went through. And I found an interview from 2012 with Ito Hiroshi. He's the former mayor of Kuchin. Kuchin's this tiny little town. It sits about 10 minutes from the ski lifts at Niseko. And he was talking about a famous bank failure in 1997. This was in November, so it was just before the ski season started. And this bank's assets, they had to be transferred to another bank, which was preparing to seize the assets of the companies that operated the ski lifts at Niseko. So it was just this chain of dominoes. And Hiroshi talked about personally visiting the offices of this bank in Sapporo and petitioning to keep the ski lifts open that season. And so I guess what struck me about this story is it gives you an idea of just how long the deflationary process can take after a major market peak. The bank we're talking about is Hokkaido Tokoshoku, and this was really the first of Japan's big banks that was allowed to fully collapse. I actually found an old article in the New York Times from the day of the collapse. It talked about how, Japan did the unthinkable. They went from a policy of propping up their banks to a policy of allowing them to fail. And it's striking that this was nearly 10 years into the bear market. It took that long to get to the point where the banks that were once too big to fail are now too big to bail out. So interesting history. As far as Niseko goes, the acquiring bank did decide to restructure. So the ski season was saved in 1997. And then I think the two lift companies kind of merged into the company that operates Niseko today. Some very cool place. Really glad I got a chance to visit. But let's take a look at an entirely new debt situation today. This chart here is total public debt outstanding at the U.S. Treasury. That's the blue line. In our view, it's not so much the total debt that's a problem. The accelerating pace of interest payments, that is the green line. The CBO expects nearly $1 trillion in interest in 2025, climbing to $1.6 trillion by 2034. The other kicker here is that all of this rise on the right side of the chart, everything from the late 90s on, has occurred despite historically low interest rates, right? So now we get to see what happens as rates return to normal levels. More likely, we think they're going to exceed normal levels. This is a classic downward debt spiral, in our opinion, and it's far from over. So that's the macro level. What about the micro level? A couple charts to show here. First, annual defaults in the U.S. and Europe. We're going back through the crisis in 2008. That's the biggest jump on this chart. Then we had 2015, 2016. We saw Greece default, lots of problems in China around this time. Then there was the meltdown in 2020. But look at the U.S. spike for 2023. According to S&P Global, there were 153 global defaults last year, and the U.S. accounted for 63% of the total. Now, European defaults have a lag, but they still saw the second highest total since the credit crisis in 2008. In our view, this is the beginning of the next crisis. And again, it's the trend in interest rates that is driving the trend in defaults. Now, next chart here, commercial real estate foreclosures, again, bottom in 2020 and that same accelerating pace higher. We have talked about the CRE markets for years. Unfortunately, there is probably a lot more pain to come for this sector. Now, the last two charts I've got here, delinquency rates in credit cards and subprime car loans. Credit card arrears higher than at any point since the Great Recession. Car loan delinquencies a 28-year high in the percentage of loans 60 days past due. So we've looked at the national level at the U.S. Treasury, then sort of the more local level with corporate loans and commercial real estate. Then we come down to the consumer level with credit card debts and car payments. The problem of higher rates, right? It's starting with these smaller loans, these smaller borrowers, and it's slowly working its way up through the system. Eventually, it becomes a problem at the national level. I'll say it again. This is a classic debt spiral, very similar to what Japan went through in the 80s. Japan lost 2 or 3 decades, economically speaking. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we see the same thing in the United States. So let me know what you think in the comments, and then I'll see you again in the next video.